Hello and welcome to my joust with Steve Keen. Let's just see why he thinks Australian house prices will fall by 40%. I always hope he's wrong, but who knows, he might be right. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Welcome, lovely to be here, mate. My
Okay,
favourite jouster.
Yes, we always do it with great respect, but we also do put the needle in occasionally. Now, Steve, for people who don't know what you think about house prices in Australia, let me get some clarification. Do you still argue that Aussie house prices are likely to fall by 40%?
Yes, I do. Yep.
Now, is this a national figure, or are you saying Sydney and Melbourne only?
Well, probably national. I'm saying Sydney and Melbourne a certainty. Nationally, probably a certainty. But say that probably, but less likely because we're so much concentrated in Sydney and Melbourne. But yeah, I think it's going to be, well, put it away, we're going to pretty much replicate what the Americans did at worst, and that was a 40% fall over 5 years.
Okay, so the fall so far, one question I should throw to you is, why do you and others opt for a 40% fall? Why can't it be 30, 32 or 50? 40 seems to be a number that comes up all the time.
It's a bit arbitrary, because when I was first asked that question, it was by Kerry O'Brien on the 7:30 report, and I basically said that, well, when Japan's bubble economy burst back in 1990, house prices fell 40% over the next 10 to 15 years, and I see no reason why we won't avoid it. That was basically an anecdotal comparison. Ultimately, Japanese house prices fell 70%, but that's a different story to us. America fell 39.8%. Peak to trough, and it's now rising again.
Ireland?
Pardon?
What happened to Ireland? How far did they fall?
Oh, Ireland, pretty much 50%. But Ireland, so I'll show you some data on Ireland shortly, but that was absolutely wild. That's probably the craziest credit bubble in terms of scale and how fast it happened and how fast it unwound. Okay. So yeah, but that's 40 to 50%, I think, is realistic.
Okay, all right. So falls so far from July 17 for Sydney dwellings has now fallen 14.5% from their 2017 high. Melbourne is down 10.9%. So explain the process that you think will happen that takes prices down further.
It's fundamentally what you were talking about in one of your most recent columns, mate, and that is, why aren't banks lending? There are plenty of good borrowers out there. Why won't they lend? And the reason is because they've lent too much for too long. And even if there are individuals out there who've got good cases to make, the amount of debt that's being generated by that credit is off the scale, astronomical. And I'm not talking just in terms of Australia's recent history. It's off the scale in our entire economic history, and it's off the scale compared to any other country on the planet, bar Switzerland. So because this is the thing that the Reserve Bank does not understand, okay, and mainstream economists do not understand, and that's the role of credit. And credit is money you get when you borrow money from a bank. When you borrow money from a bank, they'll say, "You want to buy that house in Vaucluse, Peter? That's a great idea. Here's $5 million. By the way, you owe us $5 million." So that credit is change in debt. Now, if you have a credit being positive in the aggregate for too long, your debt rises. And we've got to the stage now where we're carrying the second highest level of household debt on the planet, second highest level ever recorded, and the highest level in our economic history.
Okay, and what debt measure are you using for people who don't know what you're talking about?
Yeah, I'm talking about the level of household debt divided by GDP, that ratio. How does household debt compare to GDP for the country?
All right, so given that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but around the GFC, that measure was about 160%, wasn't it? And it's now climbed up to about 180, is that right? Or 200?
Data I'm now using, the Bank of International Settlements. There was no collected data for the globe when I started making my claims. You had to find it from the RBA. They had their way of measuring it, the Americans, and so on and so forth. The Bank of International Settlements is standardised on a common definition. And on that basis, Australia, back at the global financial crisis, had about 180% of private debt to GDP and is now about 210%.
Okay, but the chart I saw, which we went sideways during the GFC, and then with the new housing boom, we kicked up to the levels you're talking about now.
Yeah, in fact, if you like, if I can do a screen share, can I show you that particular piece of data?
Yeah. Okay, yep, well done. Isn't technology great? So the blue line, Steve, is credit?
Yeah, and the red line is private debt.
Okay. And so, and as you can see, viewers, it was around the GFC, around 170, I think, wasn't it?
180. There's 180 over here.
Yeah. Came down, didn't it, Steve? And then it's kicked up since 2010, when interest rates were cut and a boom was created.
Yep.
All right, so...
It peaked at about 205 and it's now about 195.
Okay. Now, interesting point you make was one of the big problems we've got is that banks are becoming tougher in their lending. And that's going to be a key trigger for what goes wrong.
Yep.
What if the Reserve Bank and APRA and the government lean on banks to... So like, for example, I read that story where I said that Suzanne Mitchell, CEO at Mortgage Choice, said 20% of customers who used to get loans are now not getting loans. Now, it seems to me 20% looks really big, and maybe 10% of those customers could be really good risks. What if changes are made so those additional 10% get loans? Wouldn't that be equivalent to, and this is something I've always argued with you about, was we're talking about, you often call it a bubble, but let's just call it a balloon that if you blow it too big, it bursts, right? But if a balloon is not tied up at the end, you can let the air out. Why can't good macro policy let the air out so the debt levels drop to 150 from 210? Why can't that happen?
Well, good. First of all, good macroeconomic policy. You saw me smile at that.
Yeah, we might have to put him back on. Just kill your chart so we can see your smile, Steve.
Oh, okay. Actually, I won't kill the chart because I want to talk about the consequences of good macroeconomic policy. And that is, what you want to do is have this right. You want the credit level to increase. Okay, you want more credit in the economy. Yeah. You're going to get more credit, you've got to get more debt. Yeah. So you want this to continue going up off the scale over here. Now, we're already at levels that are unprecedented in our history, that are amongst the highest on the globe, and you want that to go higher.
All right, can I interrupt you now and say, but if the interest rates fall again, what does that... So the level of debt still goes up, but the debt servicing load reduces, right?
Yeah, there's not much headroom there. And the amount of headroom is, when I've done the calculations, the deadly point in terms of demand in the economy seems to be when debt service exceeds about 8% of GDP. Anything between 4 to 8.
Now?
Oh, I'm not sure the actual rate of interest, but I'm saying it's got to be in that region or higher. And the thing is, debt service can rise for two reasons. Interest rates rise, which we're not talking about, or the level of debt rises. And if you go right back to 1990 when they were 18, 20%, the debt service level was slightly higher than it is now. Okay. You go forward to now, it's similar with a much, much lower level of interest rates because the debt that's much higher. And you're getting pushed into a corner. And the corner is that if you want house prices to rise, the level of household credit has not just merely needs to be positive, it needs to be rising. And I'll explain that in a while. So the only way out to stop this happening is not to, drop the rates and make a bit more borrowing happen. It's to make a bit more borrowing happen permanently. So credit continues to grow faster than GDP and your debt ratio continues rising. So this exponential, and it is exponential, rise in the debt ratio has to keep on going on forever. They don't go away.
So what if we go through a period of very good economic growth? Because it seemed to me that you were making this case in 2009 with me, and at least two things came to prevent this from happening. There may well have been more. One was interest rates were cut to levels that neither you or I ever expected to see, right?
I expected to see rates that low. I was amazed they didn't go lower, in fact.
Okay, and then, but on the same point, we also did have a period of growth as well. So there was growth. So, and remember, if anyone has a debt, so I use the example, I've got a really good business here and I'm really doing well. So I can handle a lot more debt than a business that's not doing well. Why doesn't that analogy work for an economy as well? That if you have an economy that's really growing strongly, even with the given level of debt, the ability to repay the debt means that you're less vulnerable than, say, well, classic case was Ireland, when the GFC hit, no one wanted to lend to them whatsoever. So is that a reasonable proposition to put out there to avoid the kind of Armageddon scenario that you think is most likely?
If it was business debt we were talking about in the aggregate, then there's a possibility for that. But even in business, the Achilles heel to the argument we can fix it up with interest rates, and that we can get, there are good borrowers out there wanting to get money, is the total demand in the economy is not just what we earn. It's the turnover of existing money plus credit. That's total demand in the economy. That, by the way, is a statement virtually no other economist agrees with, and I can prove mathematically that it's correct. So total demand is the turnover of existing money plus credit. Now, if you're looking at your good business, part of the demand coming in through your door is that turnover of existing money plus credit. If that credit goes negative, your income is going to go down, even if your business is a good one. And we've pushed the limits of debt so far, and we've pushed it to the wrong sector. We've pushed it to the households who are basically in a Ponzi scheme. Okay, they're trying to buy something and sell it for a higher price later. Okay, which only works if the person they sell it to borrows money more money than they did. A business actually produces goods and services, pumps out stuff which gets profit back in. So what you see with businesses, even if they take on a huge level of debt compared to previous times, they reach the ceiling and they stop. And corporate debt in Australia stopped at around the 80% mark back in the 1990s. And it's now it's about the same level now as it was back in 1990. Household debt, in the meantime, has gone from 45% of GDP to 120%. And unless we start selling the kids, given the current Australian economy, I wouldn't be amazed if that started to happen, but we're not going to do it. You don't make a profit out of households unless house prices are rising, and that's the catch. I just want to, again, if I could just do a quick screen share and show you that comparison of corporate debt to private debt. There's the corporate debt, which is red. You can see that way back in the post-war period, that was running at about 30% of GDP, and household debt was far lower. I think this is the sort of stable level here in the 60s, when it was about 20% of GDP for both households and corporates. Then we've been through this big bubble starting right back in the Whitlam days, right up to the 1987 stock market crash. Businesses have pretty much gone sideways, very volatile sideways ever since then. It's household debt that has just kept on going from 45% of GDP back at the time of the stock market crash up to 120%. And that's reached a limit. And that means most of our credit demand has been coming from households. Now, therefore, your good business isn't the one that's going to matter, because this isn't going to change all that much. This is the one that's going to fall.
All right. So what about the argument that, and this is an argument that was advanced by David Morgan, the ex-CEO of Westpac, when he came to Australia. And he said, I asked him, was he concerned about Australia's level of household debt? And his argument was that the people holding the debt are all in a good position to repay that debt. And that's why he wasn't worried. Now, obviously the first question is, if a recession comes along, then a lot of those people would not be in a position to pay back the debt. So is he right in saying that in the current situation that the people who are holding the debt are in a good position to repay that debt.
I don't think he's right about that in general, but I don't really think that matters. And the reason it doesn't.
But if I was lending to anyone, Steve, I would think debt serviceability is critically important.
Oh, it's critically important, but it's leaving out the important variable, and that is that, yeah, sure, if people who are currently able to carry the debt are the ones who've got the debt, then fine, they can service it. However, the total demand depends upon credit being positive. Now, if credit disappears, even if those people can support the current their current debt levels given their current income, aggregate incomes are going to fall. Credit's the essential thing that's left out of that thinking. What you need to be able to say is not just that people are capable of servicing the debt they've got to be capable of servicing a rising level of debt over time. That's the important one. Now, if they can't service a rising level of debt over time, credit goes negative and demand falls and the economy goes into a slump. And that's what happened back into America. When credit goes negative, so does the economy. And that's what we're facing now. And just to give you another little look at that, let's go back to Paul Keating was in the news recently, wasn't he? Got old mate Paul Keating. Okay. This is just, I want to show you the level of credit in the Australian economy over the last post-war period. So the level of credit has been running at just negative when the Second World War was ending, running about 10%, 12%, 16% back when Gough got done, 22% when Keating and co hit the 1897 stock market crash. Rudd got 24% of GDP as credit. It then plunged, but this little line here is the zero line. And notice credit did not go negative. Okay, so credit in Australia during the GFC didn't go below zero. It did go below zero during the recession we had to have. That's what we managed to avoid.
Okay.
Now,
Go on.
Now, for us to continue going forward, this has to remain positive. If it goes negative, as it did back in the early 1990s, we're in for a recession in the same way that America was. And I want to just compare what's that look like compared to the level of GDP. And there's GDP. And since 1970, we've been relying on credit being much bigger than GDP growth, all through the time, which means the ratio has been rising, and we can't sustain positive credit. We've been doing it for 40 years. We just can't keep on doing it for another 40 years.
So, Steve, why didn't house prices fall in 1990 to a big magnitude? They only fell, they were lucky to fall 10% during the recession we had to have. We're unemployed. So why did that happen? And why can't I say to you, if it happened then, sure, I know the level of household debt to GDP is higher, but if we avoided a massive house price collapse then, why can't we avoid it this time?
Well, now I'm going to correct you with some stats, mate, because in fact in 1990, house prices fell by 12% per annum on an annualised basis. And that's another chart I've got to show you now.
But 12% is a long way from 40, Steve. Isn't it? But 12 is a long way from 40.
Oh, yeah. But that's because we got back into positive credit again pretty rapidly. That's the level of household price. Actually, it's 2% rate of house price change. Pardon me, looking at the wrong numbers. House prices rose in real terms in the 89 boom by almost 30%. That's up here, you read it off this scale. Then notice credit was positive at about 5% of GDP, went down to -4. I'm just looking at household credit here, by the way. So there was a 10% from +5 roughly to -4 roughly. And you had rate of house price fall from pretty much 30% to about actually there we go, it was -6. I'm going to read my own chart here. That's the blue line. So house prices went from +30 to -6 pretty damn rapidly. That's a big change. But we then went back into positive credit again. Okay, all the stimulus measures under Keating, then all the stuff under Howard, halving the rate of capital gains tax, halving in bringing out the first home vendors scheme, as I prefer to call it. All this sort of stuff got us back into positive credit again. So we had it for a while, but of course, when that happened, the level of debt was lower again. There's 1990. That's the fall. We went from credit being 20% of GDP to about -2. That brought debt from 120% to 110. Now we're now at 210 or thereabouts. So we've continued delaying it, but as you delay the process of a really big downturn in credit, you simply push the debt level up. And we've now reached a level which pretty much makes us unique on the planet. And what you're saying is, can we become even more marsupial? You know, can our kangaroos get bigger? I think we've reached the point where we're hitting the wall, and any attempt to continue pumping credit in without doing anything about the level of outstanding private debt is possibly going to fail. But if it does work, it just delays the price Armageddon until later.
Okay. Now, why are you the prime understander if such a word exists and we don't know the word doesn't exist? But why doesn't the Reserve Bank understand what you're saying? What holds them back from seeing this? Is it a political imperative that they just don't want to admit that what they need to do would be to create a recession by making credit go negative?
No, in fact, mate, this is where I'm very happy that you and I shared an education in a master's degree in economics at New South Wales all those years ago. Because I can point out to you what we were learning was what they call neoclassical economics. Okay, particular strand of economics. Now, I regard neoclassical economics as being like Ptolemaic astronomy. Okay? It's got a really intricate model of the economy that matches the data and is completely wrong. And it isn't just the RBA, it's a global thing. The RBA is probably one of the most brain-dead reserve banks on the planet. Pardon me, a couple of exceptions. But they are straight neoclassical believers, and they don't see any role for credit in the economy at all. And I want to show you one more slide, pardon me. This is a paper by one of the chief economists in the Reserve Bank, whose name is Dr. Tulip. And Dr. Tulip is saying that his model, which he's just released, and that's one that Chris Joyer is relying upon about what will happen if they drop interest rates. His model has no role for credit in setting house prices. That's the part I put in here down here. Australian research has not found borrowing limits to have longer run effects on house prices. So they've left them out. But what he means by credit limits is what you're talking about, which is when you go to a bank, are they likely to give you a loan? Is it hard or is it easy? Yeah. He's talking about whether the banks say yes or no to those questions you were talking about in that survey. He's not talking about the aggregate level of credit, because according to the neoclassical theory you learned, and I've learned at university, change in debt, credit, plays no role in setting house prices. So he's left it out completely. And the trouble is, it does. Their theory is wrong. The same way that Copernican theory was wrong about the nature of the universe. They're wrong about the role of credit in the economy. So the chart I've just put up, I'm sorry for flashing some past on the screen there. This is looking at the relationship between the change in household credit and house price change in Australia. Now, what people like Tulip and neoclassicals in general believe, and therefore they don't even check the data to see whether they're right or wrong, in the same way that Ptolemaic astronomers didn't check to see whether there were craters on the moon or whether there were moons circling Jupiter. They don't even check the data. Now, according to them, that correlation should be pretty close to zero. A correlation is actually 0.54. So in credit, household credit rises, house price rises. When household credit falls, house prices fall. And by household credit, what I mean is new mortgages, fundamentally. So when new mortgages are rising, house prices will rise. When new mortgages are falling, house prices will fall. And that's in the situation we're in. And exactly the same data applied to America. Now you're looking at the American data there now. And we all know what happened to American house prices. They fell pretty much 40%. And that's because household credit went from being of the order of 4% of GDP down to -9.
Okay, Steve, but is it critical for this to happen that a recession happens?
Other way round. Because this happens, a recession happens. Because total demand in the economy is the turnover of existing money plus credit. Now, if your plus credit goes from, it did in America's case, plus 15 to minus 5, you have an effectively something of the order of a 20% fall in demand across the economy for everything, not for goods and services and assets, because we spend this money buying goods and services. Borrowed money is mainly spent to buy houses these days, okay? But the sum of demand on goods and services and assets falls of the order of 20%. That's a recession.
Okay. What about the argument that a lot of Australian households have buffers? It's a very big number that have buffers within their debt. So the debt numbers you're looking at could well be exaggerated. What's your view on that? I'm sure you've heard it. I'm sure you've tested it out. What's your view?
Oh, they do have buffers. This is actual data about how much they owe. So, like, it's true they've got some of them paid more than they need to pay. They're in advance of their principal payments on their loans. But don't forget, we'll put a real time bomb in here, and this is, where you've got to take your hats off to the regulators in this particular economy. They let so-called interest-only loans become 40% of total loans, total new loans. Now, interest-only loans, let's get rid of the jargon, are loans where you don't start paying the principal back for 5 years. So you have 5 years with just interest payments, and then 20 more years with interest payments plus higher principal repayments, because you haven't paid anything off the principal.
Yeah. A lot of those people flip their homes, don't they? That's what they think they're going to do.
The trouble is they can't flip if they haven't got a buyer and the house prices are falling. So they're about to see a 40% increase in their servicing costs, and there's masses of them. So that's going to just blow that particular thing out of the water.
So I'm not going to bet you so you have to walk to Kosciuszko. That's something that nasty Rory Robertson did to you. But what I do who of course is a friend of mine as well. But
what I like Rory. We fight, but I like him too.
Okay, so I want you to outline what you think is going to happen over the next, like, how long is it going to be before this Armageddon of a 40% price fall going to happen?
I'd say something about 3 years.
Right, so 3 years?
Yeah, and then it'll turn around. And the government, of course, will do everything they can to stop it. So we're going to get stamp duty exemptions. We're going to get first home vendors grants coming back in. They're going to probably halve, particularly if the Morrison managed to scrape over the line, reduce capital gains tax to zero, et cetera, everything to stop it happening. As I said, if they succeed in doing that, and that they certainly can slow it down, they may turn it around, but I don't think they will, then they're just going to delay it further, because the debt levels will rise even further, and we'll have in future, we're going to have more debt to get out of yet again. The Achilles heel to that argument is it always relies on being able to carry more debt. Now, we're already at global record levels, and we think we're going to go higher. I think we just have to realize just how extreme we are. And again, I'm going to do another share screen on you. So the blue line is America.
Yeah.
Notice it reached this is the household debt, about 100% of GDP, and then it fell. And it's down now to about 75. The red line is Australia. We started off well below them. We're above them at the GFC, which is why I expected us to have a crisis back then. I couldn't see us increasing debt levels. And we've now gone from there up to 120%. Pardon me. Look at Ireland. That's the crazy one. Irish debt began at 50% of GDP in 2001, hit almost 120 in 2010, and is now back down to about 45%. Spain, went from when the euro's the magic date for them, about 40% of GDP, up to about 70. They're down again. Now, notice we're the only ones still going up. And the only other country that is similar, that's actually starting to fall too, is Switzerland. So,
why has Switzerland been able to avoid a substantial crash, mate?
Switzerland runs a trade surplus of about 10% of GDP. We're running a trade deficit, have been forever. The trade surplus effectively is other people sending money to Switzerland, which means it creates money through a trade surplus. So the three ways you can create money are having a trade surplus. So, foreigners are sending you money, foreign bank accounts are going down. Complicated process, but local ones are going up. The government spends more than it gets back in tax, so the government's putting more money into your bank accounts than it's taking out. and you borrow from banks. Now,
I think we actually are running a trade surplus. We run a current
really
account,
trivial.
a current account deficit, don't we?
Not sustained for 20 or 30 years. But I'm talking, okay, and Switzerland also, and this is what I've heard from internal banking. Of course, we know what Switzerland, what do they call them before? The Swiss gnomes?
Yes.
Well, some of my friends have looked at that data and said a lot of that money is foreign. A lot of that money is the debt level itself has been recorded over there. So Switzerland is a very strange country. The only ones that I would think are comparable are places like Ireland and America, both running trade deficits. And you can see how much different their situation is to ours.
Steve, in a nutshell, explain how the level of credit goes down. It seems to me it can only go down with a recession.
Well, going down causes a recession because you have something.
But at the end of the day, the level of credit has to shrink, and it will come when people have to sell homes, banks take losses, all those sorts of things, don't they?
Yep, and it starts happening because total demand includes credit. This is again, total demand includes credit. So if people stop borrowing, total demand in the economy can fall, even if incomes are still rising for a while. Okay,
so if governments go out to foil you by keeping the show on the road, it'll mean that your 3-year view might push out the 5. But what you're saying is there will be a day of reckoning.
Yeah, and I want to show one more chart because just to get this in historical context. Because the old idea of a frog in water, which you turn the temperature up.
Yeah, the boiling frog principle. Yes.
Okay, here we go. That's Australia's. This is data I got from the RBA, by the way. Okay, so it's Reserve Bank data. There's a great paper by Fisher and Kent, the only paper from the RBA that I think is worth reading, comparing the 1890s recession to the 1930s depression, and said this one was worse. Okay. Falling debt there, and you look down the bottom here, credit was negative for about 8 years and quite substantially negative. It went negative during the Great Depression as well for a shorter period for Australia. We've only had one substantial negative credit experience since then. It wasn't during a war. That was back in the 1990s with Keating. Now we're out here somewhere, and look where it's pushed our debt level. So that's why I say we've just delayed the day of reckoning by continuing to allow credit to be given irresponsibly by banks. And they're not doing it anymore, so down we go.
Yeah. Okay, so we've put it all out there. Obviously, what I intend to do is get other people to respond, because the critical issue, in a nutshell, is that the Reserve Bank doesn't understand that credit is really important. The level of credit is really important.
The level and rate of change of credit and the level of debt, they don't understand that at all. It's not because they're uniquely stupid, it's because they're uniquely strict followers of neoclassical economics, which teaches them the same thing at university.
Well, as I always say to you, Steve, when I have a bit of a debate with you, I hope you're wrong.
I know, mate, and I'm going to finish with one more little screen I'm showing. Can you see that screen at the moment?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that is the household expenditure model for the National Australia Bank. This is one of the documents exposed by the Royal Commission. Things I've highlighted in blue over there are the one I want to talk about. HEM, can you see those numbers in the bank? HEM says that a couple earning $400,000 or more per year gross, which is, of course, we both know an extremely high family income, they are spending $3,700 a month. And therefore they have about 16,000, when you look at their net income, 16,000 they can use to service a home loan. Now, if they have a kid, their expenditures are going per month, expenses are going to go from 3,700 to 3,924, meaning that on the HEM table, the cost of raising a child is roughly $7 a day. Okay, housing, you know that's a joke. You know that's absolute fraud. That is fraud. It's about 20 times that much. So the first of all, they're saying you save 80% of your income. And secondly, they're saying a kid will only cost you $7 a day. And on that basis, they tell you how much you can borrow. That's how fraudulent the lending got to be in the Australian economy after the GFC.
Okay, well that's they're figures that you've provided, and I know you wouldn't have manufactured them. Certainly they look very unconvincing, don't they? Anyway, Steve, as always, great to catch up with you. And as I said to you before, I hope you're wrong. But I've got to say, I haven't got a strong argument to prove that you are wrong. So that really disappoints me. But maybe someone listening will come out and even correct you if that's possible.
Give it a try.
Thanks for joining us, Steve.
Thank you, mate. Bye-bye.
So that's round one between myself and Steve Keen. I'll take a lot of his critical issues and run it by other economists, and we'll get them to respond to what Steve's thinking about us eventually experiencing a house price Armageddon. You gotta hope he's wrong.